Good morning. My name is Mrs. Cunningham, and we welcome all of you for a rare and special opportunity to hear from three remarkable individuals who survived the Holocaust to live even more remarkable lives. We warmly welcome Mrs. Bruria Falik, Mr. Tibor Spitz, and Mr. Michael Silberstein. We are honored and humbled that you have come here today to share your stories with us. Why should we remember? Throughout his memoir Night, Elie Wiesel reminds us never to forget. In his words, without memory, there is no culture. Without memory, there would be no civilization, no society, no future. To remember means to lend an ethical dimension to all endeavors and aspirations. We are so grateful that our presenters will help us to know and to remember. May I please introduce Liza Goldstone, who will speak to you about the purpose and plan for this morning.
Welcome. Today is very special for all of us, and I want to start by thanking everyone who helped me make this event possible. From 10 to 11, we will graciously hear from our three wonderful survivors, and then from 11 to 11:30, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. I grew up going to hear Holocaust survivors talk about their experiences, and I am so honored to be able to share these survivors with my peers. This day is meaningful to me because I am a Jew. It's as simple as that. This day is meaningful to all of us who care about humanity. When speaking of the Holocaust, a term often heard is never forget. Never forget the camps, never forget the struggle of my people, never forget the inhumanity of the Nazis or the good-natured humanity of those who spotted wrongdoings. Never forget the 6 million Jews lost or the minority that was spared. Today, we are humbled and honored to have not one, not two, but 3 Holocaust survivors whose lives were spared. Each has a distinct story, both shocking and remarkable. As you listen to their words, I want you to think about whether or not you could have done what they did. I often wonder this myself. Before we begin, I'd like to share a poem by Barbara Sonek titled Holocaust. We played, we laughed, we were loved. We were ripped from the arms of our parents and thrown into the fire. We were nothing more than children. We had a future. We were going to be lawyers, rabbis, wives, teachers, mothers. We had dreams, then we had no hope. We were taken away in the dead of night like cattle in cars, no air to breathe, smothering, crying, starving, dying. Separated from the world to be no more. From the ashes, hear our plea. This atrocity to mankind cannot happen again. Remember us, for we were the children whose dreams and lives were stolen away. Thank you. Please give your attention to Brian Murray, who will present our first speaker.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Michael Silberstein. Michael Silberstein was born in Poland in 1930. During the war, he lived in the Lodz ghetto, Auschwitz, and the Mauthausen concentration camp. He was liberated in 1945 by American forces. By the time he was only 15, he had seen more pain than most do in a lifetime. He went on to join the U.S. Army that had saved his life. Mr. Silberstein.
I was born in a small town, not too far from the German border on the west side, and not too far from the Baltic Sea, near a city that you might remember called Gdansk. However, my parents and my other 3 siblings were born in a larger city, Lodz. As time went on, my father looked for opportunities to get a job so that he can support his family. He was given ideas, he was given suggestions, and he finally decided to end up in a smaller town than he came from. He thought that he would do better. That's when he moved with his wife, my mother, and my 3 siblings to a small town called Bruria. That's where I was born in 1930. My father did okay. Life wasn't bad in the 1930s for us. We went to school, we had friends, we played, we did all the normal things that young children do. And then something terrible happened when the Nazi armies invaded Poland. As soon as they invaded Poland, they were in our town within the first day or 2. Life became harsh and difficult for Jews, and my father and mother decided that maybe they should leave that small town and go back to the central portion of Poland where they came from, and they were seeking safety. They thought that they getting away from that small town, maybe they'll be safer going a little further inland. But as we all know from history, there was no safety. It took the Nazi armies 3 weeks to overrun all of Poland. When they finally got to the lodge where we were, the Jewish population in Lodz was a little larger than the small town that I came from. And there were rules and restrictions imposed on us Jews right away. Curfews, rations. They limited the movement that we had, that normal people could go to, that you could go to schools. We couldn't go to schools. And life became harsh. After about 2 or 3 months, the Nazis decided to establish a ghetto, a Jewish ghetto. A ghetto was really a part of the town, a designated part of the town that was surrounded by barbed wire, and there were soldiers guarding it. There were sentries on towers guarding so that we couldn't get out. And life became again very strict, very structured, and food was very limited. We were there, and as time went on, the difficulties were that if you got sick for any reason, even a minor sickness, a minor ailment could result in death because there was a lack of medicine, a lack of medical care. We had some doctors, but the doctors could only do so much with the limited resources that they had. life was difficult, and many people died. We faced hunger every day. We were assigned jobs. My two sisters, older sisters, they worked in a carpet factory where they would be weaving carpets with their hands, with their fingers. They do that all day long. It was cold. I was too young to do anything. We lived that kind of empty, harsh life for a couple of years. And in those 2 years, there were sometimes roundups within the ghetto and different selections. And in one of those roundups, my mother and I, we were put on a truck, forced to get on the truck, and we were driven to a building that used to be a hospital, but by that time it was just a gathering point where many of the people that were rounded up were put into that building. We were scared. Fear was something that we lived every day, and fear itself can be very disabling. When we got to that hospital, we stayed there overnight, hundreds of people, hundreds of us. We stayed there overnight. The next morning, we had to line up, and there was another selection. And I was holding on to my mother. I was then 12 years old. I was scared. My mother was scared. There were lots of tears. And at one point, as we were lined up, a nurse came over to my mother and to me, yanked me away from my mother. My mother had pushed me away as she indicated to me that I should run down a certain hallway, run as fast as I can. When I get to the end of the hallway, there will be a fence. She told me to jump over the fence and keep running. And that's what I did. My mother was taken to a place called Chelmno. It was an extermination camp. I did not know it at that time what it was. But after my mother was taken, I never saw my mother again. When I got back to our apartment in the ghetto, my father and my two sisters were there, and it was extremely sad. Everybody was asking where is mother. Well, mother wasn't there. We had to accept that, my father, my two sisters, and I. We had to accept our existence without our mother, without a wife. We lived in the ghetto for 2 more years. At the age of 12, I was fortunate to get a job in an electric shop where they would repair motors and different electrical appliances. Of course, I was only 12 years old. I couldn't do anything except what I was told to do, and most of the time I was sweeping the floor or I would do anything that the people that were older told me to do. And at one time I was considered lucky because at least I was inside the building and I wasn't exposed to the severe winters that we experienced. While we were in the ghetto, it was cold. It was cold in the apartments. People were breaking up furniture in order to make a fire in an old-fashioned stove so as to keep warm. We lived that existence for 2 years, 2 more years. Until in 1944, the Nazis determined that they should want to liquidate the ghetto. What it meant that everybody had to report to a particular gathering point. We would be put, go to a train station. We would be put onto cattle cars, forced onto cattle cars. My 2 sisters and I, we went in one cattle car. My father went into a different one. He was sick. He couldn't move around as well as us young people. When they shut those doors in the cattle cars, and you might have seen some of these pictures in different movies. It was tight. Very, very many people in the same car. It was one of the most dehumanizing experiences that I had in my life. Men, women, and children packed into the same place. And we have to do what we have to do. It was awful. We went on that train, that trip, a couple of days. And at that time, we did not know where we were going. We were told that we are going by the Nazi soldiers, that we are going to a resettlement camp. That's all we knew. When we got to our destination, we got to a place called Auschwitz. They opened the doors to the cars. There were soldiers with dogs. They told us very quickly to get out. Get out very, very quickly. And the first thing they did is separated men from women. So my 2 sisters had to go one way, my father went another way, and I went another way. What we did is immediately we faced a selection. And there was a Nazi officer, and based on his whim, just whatever he wanted to do, he would wave you either to the right or to the left. If you went one way, you went to the gas chambers. If you went another way, you were considered fit for work. I was lucky enough, I was considered fit for work. My father didn't make the selection. He went to the chambers, gas chambers. I went to another place, and they tattooed a number on my arm. And that time, getting a tattoo on my arm was a positive thing, because at least I was considered someone that will be assigned to do some kind of work. We didn't know what, but that didn't matter. We were Auschwitz I was in Auschwitz for 7 months. And again, we witnessed every day being beaten up, being pushed around and being beaten up was a daily occurrence. Fear was one of the most difficult emotions that we had to deal with every day, because you never knew what the next day is going to bring. I was sometimes sent to work in a quarry with stones, doing useless work, just doing work. Every day at 5 o'clock, we all had to get up, run out. They counted us. We couldn't escape. We couldn't go anywhere. But they counted us every morning. And again, daily life was very difficult. Every afternoon, we got a piece of bread and a soup, and we got some coffee. And we lived that way. And during those 7 months, there were additional selections. And the reason there were so many selections, because at that time, it was 1944, trains full of Jews from all over Europe were arriving to Auschwitz 24 hours a day. And there was only so much room for people. So the way to make room, people that arrived, many were gassed and burned. 6 million of us were destroyed. We lived that way for a number of months. We were all, by the way, our heads were shaven, boys and girls, heads were completely shaven. And by the way, boys and the girls were not together, men and girls, the women were separated. So at that time I did not know what happened to my sisters, and they did not know what happened to me. We knew that my father didn't make it. And my mother perished 2 years earlier. In 1944, the Russian armies were beginning to close in on Poland. Now, mind you, we did not know what was going on, how the war was going. We had no access to news, to newspapers, to radio. We were really in the dark. So as the Russian armies were approaching, it was determined again to liquidate Auschwitz. So there was a march organized in the winter. March lasted about 4 or 5 days. We marched day and night, rested a little bit. Half of the people that marched didn't make it. By then I was 14. And for a boy of 14, I was in fairly good shape. And just to recap, when I went through the first selection in Auschwitz, there were some rumors from older people. They said, they will ask you how old you are. I was 14, and they said, don't tell them that you are 14. It's not good to be that young, because then they don't need you. So I looked at the guy and said, he asked me how old I was, and I said I was 16. He looked at me again, and that may have saved my life, maybe. So when we were going from Auschwitz, marching for days, and the older people and very young didn't make it. And if you fell by the wayside, you were shot. We marched like that for a few days, and we got to another train station. They put us on cattle cars again, and they shipped us to a concentration camp called Mauthausen. That was in Austria. Mauthausen was a dump, a horrible place, dirty. When they put us to go to sleep, we were like sardines on the floor, tight. No facilities to wash. I was in Mauthausen for about 5-6 months. I must tell you that at the end I had lice on me, not just me, everybody. I remember during the day when it was cold, we would stand outside and huddle. Several of us would get together and huddle to keep warm. And again, that kind of existence we endured. I endured for 5 more months. In May of 1945, the American Army liberated Mauthausen. I was 15 years old. It was a great day of joy. I remember we were given food and we ate food until we got sick. But it was also a sad day. Because for the first time in my life, I was 15 years, I was all alone. No family, nobody to ask questions, nobody to get any advice from. And there were hundreds of us. And the question was, where do we go now? Where do we go from here? Our education slipped about 4 or 5 years. We lost 5 years of our education. We didn't know where to go. We did not know what to do. But pretty quickly there were some DP camps, displaced persons camps, set up. I got to one of those camps, and I remember that at that time, different camps that were set up, they exchanged lists of people that are in those camps. That was in the hope that maybe we can find each other. Somebody from my camp would go to another one, someone from there would come to me, and we would look at the list, at the names. Well, my sister found me. My older sister found me. It was an emotional reunion. And we started another phase of our life. For a short period of time, I got to Italy. from Italy, I had the opportunity to go to England. That was a lucky break for me. I got to England, I was 15 and a half. Myself and many other boys and girls my age, between the ages of 15 and 18. We got to England. The first thing we had to do was learn the language. We didn't know how to speak English. So we made a tremendous effort. We were studying English 12 hours a day. We had to do that so that if we want to go to school and get a high school diploma and go to college, the first thing we have to do is know how to speak English, to understand English. Classes are given in English. So we did that. While in London, I got an equivalent high school diploma, equivalency diploma, and I went on to college to study electrical engineering, and I got a degree in that. London was an excellent experience. We started to be normal youngsters, but we also realized that our loved ones weren't there, and they weren't going to come. So there was joy and sadness at the same time. From London, I came to America. In 1952, at the urging of my family, I had aunts and uncles and lots of family, and everybody was telling me to come to America, and I'm glad I did. I came in 1952, in July of 1952. In March of 1953, I was drafted into the American Army. The Korean War was going strong, and anybody that was eligible for the draft, and young people between the ages of 18 and 26 were eligible for the draft. I was 23. I fit the bill, so I was drafted. Now I must tell you, I did not mind being drafted. It was a good experience. As a result of being in the Army, I became a United States citizen, which was a great advantage. And I was a proud soldier. I made some good friends. One of them is my friend till today. So the Army experience was not a bad experience for me. After I was discharged from the Army, I met my future wife, Lillian. We have now been married for 58 years. We have 2 sons, 4 grandchildren. One of them lives in New Jersey, the other one lives in Virginia. I also was fortunate enough to get a job with IBM. I had worked for IBM most of my adult life, most of my career was spent in IBM. I live in Poughkeepsie, and we actually like living in this area. My wife and I, we have many friends, we enjoy life. This area is really pretty, beautiful. So here I am, survived, retired by now, and grateful for all the things that I have. Thank you for listening.
Just check for a moment. Are we all set up here?
Thank you once again for sharing your story with us. My name is Rebecca Lewitt. Please allow me to introduce to you Mr. Tibor Spitz. Tibor Spitz was born in Slovakia in 1929. From the age of 10, he suffered the slow and systematic persecution of a government which no longer recognized his rights as a human. His deportation to a camp was postponed due to his parents' position in the community, likely saving his life. As a 14-year-old, he escaped the authorities before his deportation, hiding underground in the forest for 7 months.
All the paintings you will see here were done by me, ceramics, sculptures, whatever you will see. I try to illustrate whatever you will see so that it would be both visual, but because of lack of time, it will be very fast. I hope you can cope with it. I came from Czechoslovakia, you see it on the map. And Czechoslovakia came from 2 countries, Czech part and Slovak part. I came from the Slovak part, roughly where the arrow. The town was very small, 2,600 people. It was very high in the mountains. The mountains were between Poland and Slovakia. You see, these are summer pictures, and you see snow still on the peaks because of higher than 5,000 feet tall. My father was a Jewish reverend. They called him a chazan, cantor, shochet, whatever, something like a rabbi, even more because he did everything. My mother was a teacher, and I had an older brother and the younger sister. I went to normal school. It was no difference between Jews and non-Jews. I was the only Jew in the class. There were about 60 people in the class. The area was very poor. You see the first row here, barefoot children, boys in summertime, keeping their shoes for winter. In Germany and Austria, next countries, our neighbors, they were already going on. The Nazis were already persecuting Jews, and not only Jews, also political opponents, gypsies, and so on, minorities. but mainly Jews, and they were really concentrating in making life of us miserable. In Czechoslovakia, it was not yet so bad. Czechoslovakia was a democracy, but we were really worried. You see the picture showing a growing, questions about our future. The real trouble started when Czechoslovakia fell apart. Slovakia became a fascist republic. President is shaking hands with Hitler, and he accepted all the Nazi ideology and all politics associated with it, including military and economic cooperation. We really were worried because we were unarmed, we didn't have any country backing us up, as Polish minorities were backed up by Poland, Germans by Germany, Hungarians by Hungary, and so on, because there were about 5 neighboring countries. Jews didn't have any of that. Israel didn't exist yet. We were mostly educated, industrious, we worked very hard, but we were extremely peaceful, and Nazis knew that. We started feeling like this painting is like being a person between two beasts. You know, like you make a little movement, you turn around, and they get you. It was really terrible because Europe, United States, England, even USSR abandoned the Jews. Nobody was backing us, and we were just worried and worried, as the previous speaker was telling. We were exposed to terror, violence, broken windows, anti-Semitic slogans, shouting, you know, all around us, beating me on the street whenever they wanted, and whoever wanted it, cursing, threats, newspapers, publications, radios, at the time television didn't exist, was filled with hatred and explaining how bad we really were, we didn't know what to do, because this was a ethnic group is the lowest possible crime and violence ever. Then came a moment in 1941 where we had to wear a yellow star. I brought you one to see. It looked like that in Slovakia. It didn't have the description Jude on it, as you see on this picture. But even children had to wear it on the left-hand side. There had to be songs so that you couldn't remove it. And it was a fine. A policeman came and checked it, and if it did not, if his tip of his pencil fit, how it was sewed on an outer clothing, like here, we were getting a fine. In 1942, Slovak government, Nazi fascist governments decided to deport the Jews. First of all, in 1940-41, all properties were confiscated, nothing left in our home. Whoever wanted to come and take a piece of furniture or clothing was free to do that. And we had to bring to a police station practically everything, one after the other items, which means that the apartments were empty. And then Slovak government decided to deport us somewhere, as you said, to resettle us. They didn't tell us we are taking you to a concentration camp or to a gas chamber or crematoria to burn your bodies. We are not going to kill you. They told us you will be settled, deported, and deportees expected to work and live because the whole families were going. First of all, they took young people, young men and young girls, and then the whole families. And it looked like orderly, everything was according to laws. They issued 170 laws, gradually depriving us of human rights, legal rights, and property, and now we had to go somewhere else to be resettled and work. Deportation looked like that. People dressed normally with a small luggage were put into those cattle cars and shipped somewhere to be so-called resettled. My grandparents, you see on this picture, aunts, uncles, these are my mother's sisters and parents who were deported. None of them survived. This is a 1941 wedding photo. My mother is standing here. This is a picture. This is her wedding. My mother's sister, she was 21. And the rest of the family, three sisters with husbands, all taken to resettlement. None of them survived. My father had 7 siblings. Most of them had families, my cousins, my age. I was born in 1929, which means that 1 year older than you were. But, you know, I'm 85 now, 86 this year. And all those people were sent, shipped, and I never seen my cousins again, and my uncles and aunts again, and my grandparents. They kicked us out of school in 1940 already, and we had to produce a Jewish school. My mother became a teacher, and this became part of our survival story, because the teacher had to be in school until all the children were deported, except my sister here and my brother here. None of them survived. All of them were taken with their families to mostly Auschwitz, because where we lived, Auschwitz was about 50 miles across the border from Slovakia to Poland. This boy, schoolmate, my age, was a son of pharmacist, and Slovaks didn't have pharmacists. Most of them were Jewish, and they would have died out of diseases. That's why they had a so-called exemption. They were exempt from deportation first. They caught him and his mother in a forest where they were hiding in 1944 and shot him anyway. This is used. There are some younger people in the front row and older, like 15, 18, 20, even over 20 years old. None of them on this picture survived. All of them were taken either as young girls or young boys separately, and then with the rest of the families. Not a single one of them lived. How come we survived? I already told you, my mother was exempt from, temporarily exempt from it because she was a teacher of a Jewish school, and before they didn't want Jewish kids running around on the streets and doing mischief. My father was a reverend. He was in charge of burials. Nobody wanted to bury a Jew in case they died. It was a Slovak territory, which means that they kept aside again a reverend, my father, who would bury Jewish persons who died. Because I was 12 and my brother 14, we were digging the graves and doing everything manual associated with it, which means that we were like a family to be deported with the last transport when Jews would not live in Slovakia anymore. This is my painting how a person dressed in Jewish garbs and having his Torah scroll in his shoulder, like ascending to heavens from the villages here on the underneath. This is a war story, like horses, armed men, and children, mother and child, really afraid of their lives. I have to tell you one important thing. Our family refused to be deported because we by accidents found out where those deportees are going and how they ended up. We didn't have any proof of it, but there were some escapees whom we hid and directed toward Hungary, which was at that time not yet taken over. We'll have hear the story from our third speaker. And my parents, when they were young, went to Palestine, and they really had a terrible time there because it was land where it was very difficult to live, very hostile population, British consider them terrorists and this and that, which means that they learn how to live very tough lives, and they also read Mein Kampf, which was a Hitler book issued in 1925, and they knew that what Hitler meant, and they believed that he used the word ausrotten, means annihilate, and they believed that he really is going to do what he meant, but most people, politicians particularly, saying, oh, he's exaggerating, he's just a diplomat, you know, threatening blindly and so on. In 1942, when this was going on, Slovakia was in the middle of Europe, and it was very difficult to run anywhere because they were already very deep in the Soviet Union, and they were already in Africa and all Europe. They kept Europe very firmly. When our turn arrived to be deported, we decided to live as a wild animals in the forest, because this was the only way. We couldn't fly anywhere, we couldn't live underwater, we couldn't live in cities, we didn't have false papers, everybody knew us. Which means that we found in the forest a spot, here it is with a red arrow, and it was still fall, 1944. This is how the forest looked. We dug a hole here, and I show you how this would be like a slope or a little hill, a little bit of water, like a stream about 1-2 feet wide, depending if it's raining or not. We just removed the soil, the dirt out of this like, triangle, put a structure like that. We found those wood in the forest, like fallen trees, tree trunks, and so on. Built something like that. It was all designed by my brother, who was luckily a genius, and he imagined it in his mind. It was a hole in the middle, and this is practically how it looked from outside. This was all camouflaged. We were inside, and patrols were trying to find us because they knew, Gestapo knew that we were somewhere there. But we believed that the Red Army was already in Poland in 1944, and that it would take a few weeks, maximum a month or two. But eventually in November, snow fell on the ground. The forest looked like this, and we had nothing to eat, and being in a hole in the middle of something, in an environment like that, and Nazis, you know, like Gestapo, German and Slovak soldiers, SS groups on horseback, were combing the forest trying to find us. This is what I painted because they were not only the Nazis, but also local people who were promised huge rewards in case they would report hiding Jews, and they were anti-Semitic parties and guerrillas who were fighting the Nazis, but were gladly robbing the Jews in the forest, which means that these are the paintings I made when I remember those situations. You know, you also mentioned the death marches. This is one of the paintings I made about the death marches and killing people. Finally, in April 4, 1945, Red Army really defeated the Nazis. They were fighting in the same forest where we were hiding 5 times because it was a distillery close by. Both armies were already demoralized and very tired, and they found the distillery, got drunk. Germans came back, killed the Russians, and the Russians came back and killed the Germans, and so on, 5 times back and forth over our head, and we were in that hole. And we survived the Holocaust. However, we were all sick, almost dead, but eventually Third Reich, the Nazi, huge, powerful state with huge army was defeated, and we were liberated. There were 6 million victims, and you should remember that among them were 1.5 million Jewish children who perished in their childhood just because they were born in a Jewish family. Nothing, they did nothing, they were guilty of nothing, and they didn't commit any crime. And unfortunately, it happened in the meantime to other ethnic groups, and we have to be aware that there are no guarantees. This is one of my wood carvings, you know, like sad landscape, a ceramic sculpture I made. As Mr. Silverman, I also went to school after the war, graduated high school. This is my high school. My brother and sister and mother survived. My brother died very young, 33 years old. My father didn't live even 60, probably all consequences of that terrible life. Here I graduated, became a chemical engineer, and also I have a PhD in chemical engineering, specialized in ceramics, ceramic engineering, specialized in glass making. And I got all kinds of diplomas. These are patents and publications I made. Here's one of my inventions used in practically all glass people anywhere in the world. Then finally, when I was 37, I got married to Noemi, also Holocaust survivor, but she was 1 year old when the war ended. I was 15. This is our Jewish wedding, because in the communist country, Jewish weddings were not tolerated and not valid as a document, which means that we had to go to. Finally, I was sent to Cuba to fix their glass industry because I became a really good specialist. And we spent 9 months in Cuba, from where we escaped, and because an Cuban airplane landed in Canada, we just escaped from there and became Canadian citizens. First 5 years we were again stateless refugees with a travel document instead of passport, because if they caught us, Czechoslovak or Russia would have caught us, we would be in prison for 15 years each for escaping or for not returning home. It was in 1968. 9 years later, we became American citizens, again moved 4 times until we landed in, these are all kinds of diplomas I have achieved, and a certificate of technical recognition, and this and that, professional engineering. We landed in Kingston, New York, which is close by, at National Micronetics, developing magnetic recording as computers hardly started, dating 1983, and I spent 14 years developing those very high-tech, having also patents and inventions here. At the age of 68, I became an artist, and I started recording all those events. I had exhibitions in Canada, in the United States, in Europe. Here are some posters and some catalogs from those exhibitions. This is one big in Bratislava, Slovakia. This one, Prague. It was a book, Jewish American Artists and the Holocaust, a painting. They chose a painting to put in the book, and this was a Death March painting in 1997. Then another book took my paintings and put it in the book. It was like a book of poetry from the Holocaust. Next month they will show a movie. This is a poster. It's a documentary movie called Portrait Tibor Spitz in Slovakia. We are going to go there, I don't know, but they came and filmed about 11 hours and made 53 minutes documentary movie of it. Now I show you a few of those pictures. So this is another big painting of marches, Death marches where whoever could not hide or escape or survive became weak, was shot and put next to the road. These are some religious paintings, and when I really learned how to paint and was able to confirm, to to get some self-confidence in painting, and I got rid of my pain and terrible memories, painting those terrible faces, you know, in distress. Finally, I started painting even music and fishing. I love fishing, or some fantasy paintings like this one. And again, I became a known good artist, even if I started my career for previous 40 years as a scientist and technologist and glassmaker. This is a stone, there are some stone sculptures. These are wood carvings and wood burnings. This is when I was involved in the mystical studies and teachings. I also was teaching mysticism. I'm giving those lectures. Tomorrow, if somebody of you can get to Purdue, tomorrow I will give this lecture at 6 o'clock in Purdue in a library. It's about maybe half an hour drive. Just the warnings that genocides and Holocaust can happen again. There are again countries which would love to kill other people and get rid of them, which means that I leave it like that and let you ask questions at the end.
Thank you again. My name is Mateo Kep, and I would like to introduce you to Miss Bruria Falik. Bruria Falik and her family were from Hungary. While in several concentration camps, she endured inhumane conditions and the loss of many of her loved ones, including a baby sister born in the camps. While being transported from one such labor camp to Bergen-Belsen death camp, her train was stopped. This was in 1945. She was then liberated by the U.S. Army on an idle train filled with 2,500 Jews. Mrs. Falik.
I guess it's morning. Good morning. I was born Clara Bodek, Hungarian name, in a small town of 800 people who were mainly farmers. There were a few people who were professionals, like a doctor, a pharmacist, whatever the community needed to subsist. Kenderes is a very important town or village in Hungary. That's where Horthy Miklós was born. Horthy Miklós was the commander of Hungary during the 30s and 40s. We had no navy in Hungary, but he liked the title commander, so he was commander. And he lived in a very big palace, which he visited twice a year, on his birthday and on Christmas. My father, may he rest in peace, was the rabbi of the town. There were 10 Jewish families. All the children of these families were already grown and gone off to the big city, to schools. We were the youngest Jewish family, and the Jewish schools were already closed because there weren't enough besides us to go to the school there. So I went to Catholic schools, which gave me a different view of how people worship and how they live. My best friends were my neighbors' children. And we shared in everything that was possible to share, except for religion. We were very orthodox and kosher. And my neighbors grew pigs and all kinds of stuff like that. And my father was an avid farmer as well. He was a rabbi, a watchmaker, and a farmer. So he grew a lot of wonderful vegetables, and love I still possess. I love to grow green stuff. And every summer, when the lettuce became too much for us to finish, we would take that over to the neighbor's pigs. So this was a joke. The Orthodox Jews who don't eat pigs, because it's not kosher, feeds the pigs of the neighbors. So this was the harmony in the town. Going back to Horty, when he came to town twice a year, my father would go over to the mansion and adjust all the clocks and the watches in the mansion for his arrival. One year, my father took me with him. I was about 6 years old. I just want to point out to you how naive I was, even at 13. My father was going around the mansion doing adjusting the clocks, and Horty was right with us, and he tapped me on my head and he said, which was a big honor, after all, he was the head of that country. Are you going to be a watchmaker as well when you grow up? And I looked in astonishment. Girls don't get to be watchmakers. That was my first question, what girls can do and cannot do. As the time went on, my father was arrested because he was not a Hungarian citizen. There was a rule that if your father and grandfather and so forth were not born in Hungary, you can never be a Hungarian citizen. So the Hungarian authorities, this is still under Horty, gathered all the non-Hungarian citizens to be sent to labor camps, to the Ukraine and to other areas where the Allies were bombing. The last time I saw my father was in 1944. That's when the Hungarian Nazis took over the country with the blessing and probably the insistence of the Germans. At that point, we moved to my grandfather's place, who was also a rabbi in a smaller town. There were 1,800 people instead of 800. 34 Jewish families. My grandfather was the teacher, the rabbi, and he wasn't a watchmaker. But he was a wonderful shoe polisher. Every Friday afternoon before the Sabbath, he laid out about 24 pairs of shoes, and with his white beard, very regal, very wonderful face like an angel, sat on a stool and polished all the shoes for the whole family. That's a memory I have from that time. It was very sweet, even though the war was raging, people were being arrested and deported, but the memories that my family has blessed me with is unerasable. Just like my dark hair in the bed. I asked my beautician to leave it, and she says, "Why cut it off?" I said, "No, this is where my memory is stored. And I don't see it every day. I only see it when I want to." It's the same with memory. What you want to see, you will see. What you don't, you repress. And then you question, Why are you bothered about something? But I won't go into that. Being a psychologist, I'm not going to go into that right now. So one morning when we wake up, we have a uniformed person standing with a gun in the middle of the compound. In the country, it was customary to have the Jewish community leaders in a compound, like the rabbis and teachers and the kosher butchers and all the workers of the community in a compound. So in our compound, there was the school, the temple, the place where they have prepared, they did the butchering of the kosher fowl, because in Hungary they were not allowed to cut four-legged animals. It was considered not ethical. So we all grew up on two-legged animals and wings. So the soldier was standing there by the well, and that was the main source of water in this compound. We didn't dare to go out, and especially my mother didn't want the children to go near him. And somehow we found out that he was put there to guard us. That's what he said. He's there to protect us. Well, the protection was this. If we looked up when we heard an airplane, which was an Allied plane, we were punished. If we mentioned the name SS or Hitler, we were severely punished. So we were to shut up and bear it. We moved to that place once my father was arrested. The whole Jewish community had to gather into the compound or around the compound that were owned by Jewish families. We were there a couple of months until horse and buggies came to take us to a ghetto, a town a couple of hours away by horse and buggy. It was a huge army camp, full of people of all kinds. Everybody was shaven. All the hair was shaven, of men and women. And it was scary. It's almost like some people today from the moon who came down to greet us. From there, every day, certain number of people were taken further. When our turn came, we were packed into cattle cars. They were called 80. 40 for cattle and 80 for people. Well, you can imagine, we were 80 or more. We drove through Austria, through Vienna, actually, when the Allies were bombing Vienna. Right in front of the cathedral. It wasn't demolished, it was just hurt. We were going through these open cattle cars while the bombings came down, and the cars went like waves of an ocean, up and down from the impact. And this train took us to a disinfection camp, as if we were dirty. Maybe we were. It will come to me. There we had to put down all our belongings. We were allowed to take enough that we were able to carry in 2 hands. And we were marched into a shower room. For some reason, we came out of the shower room. Many people's belongings were left there. We didn't see any, or I didn't see any ones who were carried out, but I learned about it later. From this disinfection camp, we were transported again by cattle cars to Austria, to the farms where we were slave laborers. We were collecting sugar beets. Sugar beets are very heavy. I was 13. I already had to work because I was 13. And we were living in a silo, which is maybe a quarter or less. Maybe it's as large as this stage. We were 34 people. We were the largest family, 13 of us. My grandparents, 2 aunts with 2 children, my mother, and 6 children. And my mother was expecting the 9th. We were 9 children altogether. 2 of my siblings that were born after me, a boy and a girl, were spending the summer with my grandparents in Satmar, which is a section of Hungary, Romania, and so forth. Depends who occupied it at one time, at a certain time. And they were not allowed to come back home because Jews were not allowed to travel in public transportation. So they perished with my grandparents, my father's parents, in Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, Auschwitz claimed up to 300 members of my family. In this work camp, as I said, my mother was pregnant, and she did not have to work. We lived in this silo altogether, 34. The rest of the people were strangers to us. But we all lived here sleeping on straw. No sheets, no pillows, no blankets, straw. As a 13-year-old, to me it looked so out of this world. It was, actually. But I couldn't understand all these things. I can't tell you that it really, I should disclaim something, that it really bothered me or hurt me. I was just wondering why. My question is even today, why? I know what happened, but why? It's always the question. There are all kinds of reasons and justifications, and it's all baloney. There is a why that has an answer, and we have to find the answer so it doesn't happen again. Anyway, in this straw silo, we discovered that there was a person living as far as the exit light in the woods. And at night, when it was quiet, we were all back in the silo, and it was dark, we had no light, we had no matches, there was nothing to light up our lives there, except each other. We heard the dogs barking. We were guarded by big guard dogs so that we shouldn't escape. We heard this dog barking tremendously, and all of a sudden it was quiet. And we heard a little movement, like in the grass or in the trees. And when one of us went out to see what it was, there was the first time and always every night something, this neighbor at the exit light would leave something for the children and for my mother. She left, we found out who she was later on, and my mother was in contact with her for many, many years, all the years she lived. She would bring, for mother, I remember, a bottle of whiskey before or after she gave birth, and she must have helped my mother because nobody was in the silo, even the little kids, if they didn't work, but they had to go out to the fields. So there was no evidence except for what my mother said. She left clothing and stuff for the baby. And this was such a contrast to what we already went through and yet didn't yet go through. The dog stopped barking because she must have thrown them some meat, so they shut up and she could come close without being detected. But if she would have been detected, she would have been also sent, either shot or sent to the camps. We found out later, or my mother found out later, she was a woman from Czechoslovakia who lived there with her son, and she was the one who was this angel. She also left sheets for my mother and the babies, but us, we would steal burlap bags that we used to pack up the sugar beets, and we would make sheets from the burlap bags. My aunt organized all this. She was a good sewer, and you know, it was like camping out in the worst possible, under the worst possible circumstances. When the winter came, we were shipped off to Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen was a death camp. Very little of extermination camp, but overwhelmingly a death camp. For example, I don't know if you read Anne Frank's diary or you heard of it. Anne Frank was in the camp right opposite ours, where the Dutch people were stored. And the rule was that the Dutch must have died 1,000 a day, and if they didn't, they were killed. We, the Hungarian group, part of us were in a Sonderlager. A Sonderlager is a special camp or a separate camp. We were, by some providence, saved by a man called Rezső or Israel Kastner. He was a Hungarian lawyer who was actually enrolled, but also volunteered to negotiate with the Nazis in Budapest, in the capital of Hungary, to save the Hungarian Jews. 500,000 to up to 600,000 were already exterminated in Auschwitz. And there were still 50% of us left. And the Germans, this was the last day of the war. The Germans were very short of ammunition and medicine and food. And to save the war, if you heard the name Eichmann, he was then in charge of exterminating the Hungarian Jews. He and Mr. Kastner was negotiating because the Germans wanted money and they wanted equipment. So through Switzerland, they negotiated with Switzerland, giving the Germans trucks and medicine in lieu of saving us. How we got on the list of being saved was sheer coincidence. So we were in the Sonderlager, and the Swiss, the exchange was supposed to be that they give the Germans what they need, what they wanted to give them, and in lieu of that, we will be taken out from the camp and transported to Switzerland. One group actually made it. The second group, which would have been us and the rest of us, didn't go through with this agreement because the negotiations with the Germans broke down. The Germans wanted more and more money. They tapped every source they could think of. That's including wedding rings and earrings and all the gold in your mouth. Everything they could collect, they collected. But they also wanted to collect from Hungarian industrialists who happened to be part Jews and part non-Jews. So they collected from the Jews. They wanted to collect from this big company, I don't remember the name of it now. But because the half of this company, the other partners weren't Jews, the ruling was that the Hungarian government ruled that they cannot be touched. So the Jewish partners either hid in Hungary or were exported to a safe place. As we were in Bergen-Belsen, as I said, because we were in a special camp, we got all kinds of goodies, chocolate, ham, which we didn't eat because it wasn't kosher. Except that my grandfather, who was the rabbi, he says, in order to save your life, you have to eat it. My mother got sick from it. And with 6 children and the baby, it wasn't an easy task for her. The baby got sick. She passed away 2 months into the 6 months we were there. And she and my aunt took an old sheet and made her a, I don't even know, they had needles, maybe they did. And they made her a shroud, a burial shroud. I'm just trying to give you the psyche of the people living in that condition. And my mother insisted she wants to go to the funeral. And I said, how does she think of going to a funeral when piles and piles of bones and skin is piled up all over wherever you went, wherever you looked? There was a young rabbi who said that he would take care of the funeral. And my aunt and him did what they did. I never asked. My aunt is not living anymore. I never wanted to know because I imagined what happened. Bergen-Belsen was a huge, huge camp. Anybody who would parachute into this camp could get lost in seconds, in a good way. So one day, there was a big turmoil. Everybody had to stay in the barracks. Nobody could leave. They were looking for someone who apparently parachuted into the camp. It happened to do a British soldier. And as soon as he landed, the people around him changed his clothing and hid him. So he was never found. But the rumor went around the camp that the war is almost over. This was the beginning of April of 1945. Soon enough, the Germans wanted to empty the camp because they wanted to show the world that they really didn't do what the world says they did. So they started to cover up the bodies. They created huge berms to cover up the bodies. There was no burial. This was like a mass cover-up. And they asked people to volunteer to go on a train ride. Those of us who were alive. It was voluntary. There were 3 trains, 2,500 each. I was always stubborn, and thanks to my father, always the encouragement that you can survive if you believe, if you go after what you want to survive. And I told my mother, let's go on the train. I asked her. She said, no, we are here already, pretty soon it will be over, let's just stay and wait it out. Well, then my grandfather made the decision that we all go on the train. I'm telling you, with the mind of a 13-year-old girl going on 15, Germany, that area is a beautiful country. The mountains, the valleys, the woods, the ravines, everything around was so beautiful. And I saw this all from the train. Because we were in the special camp, we were packed in passengers train instead of cattle cars. So I must have been like skin and bones. I had a privileged room on the luggage compartment. I just fit in there, this side and this guy, this thing. So I could see from the window this and wondered, how can people be so cruel with such beautiful areas? Well, the train continued a few days. I thought it was 2 weeks, but I was told it was only a week. We stopped all of a sudden near a little town, Hillersleben in Germany. It used to be a factory town, an aircraft factory town for the Nazis. And we were stranded in the train. The guards had us get out of the train every morning and stand. It was called appel, means show up. And they counted us, made sure that nobody escaped. If somebody escaped, everybody was punished for it. And they were standing opposite us with their guns. And I understand that there was an order to shoot us all because the Allies already crossed the river. The aim of this train was actually to bring us to Theresienstadt, which was an absolute extermination camp, and get rid of us. But since the Allies already occupied Theresienstadt area, the next plan was to send us over the river and blow up the bridge so the Allies can't cross. That also failed. The Allies crossed the river. So here we were in a limbo, no food, no water. So as children, some of us went into town and knocked on doors, and people were bewildered. They didn't know who were we. And I know Germans, and I said, who are you? They asked us. And I said, we're Juden. Juden. And a woman put her hand on my head to see if I had actual horns. So this gives you an example of what kind of people, if they didn't sanction the SS, the Nazi work, they didn't know exactly what they were doing, and they were not interested. Who in this world would think that Jews have horns? Only the ones who study the Bible. I mean, I'm nothing against religion. I mean, their source came from that. Anyway, I said we wanted food. She said they don't have any. So I got a big doll as a gift from them. We went back to the camp, and the next day, we see a row of people in uniforms on the hill. We were in a ravine, and American soldiers appeared on the top of the hill. They didn't dare to come down because they were afraid of diseases. But they rolled down from the mountain, from this hill, everything that can be put in a can. We, coming from a small town in Hungary, our eyes were as big as a plum or whatever, because even bread was in a can. We didn't have can openers, so we were looking for sharp stones to open the cans. How the American soldiers got there? They were the 30th Infantry Division that liberated this train. There were 4 tankists, one from California, one from Colorado, and one from New York. The one from New York, luckily we got to meet him before he passed away. But they were scouting out runaway Nazis. And they only by chance stumbled on our train. Because we were down in a valley. And the train, half of the people in it were already succumbed. These young American soldiers, 18, 19 years old, opened the cattle car's doors, and the bodies just fell on them, fell out on them. They were sick, physically sick from what they saw. And we hear this from the soldiers, because we have a reunion every year, the soldiers and the survivors. And so we were taken by, there was one person who was appointed as a liaison between us and the American medical unit. They took us into the town, took care of us medically and food-wise. And also, the decision came, where do we go? What are they going to do with us? They were going to do with us whatever we wanted to. Part of my family decided to go back to Hungary. I, again, the stubborn, always the stubborn one in the family. I said, I'm not going back to Hungary from where they chased us out. I want to go to Israel because my father always talked about Israel when we were little. And also, the Russians were going to take that part over. You know, the Allies divided Germany to British, American, and Russian. And this section was going over to the Russians. And we heard awful things about the Russians. So we didn't want to, I at least, and my mother and one of my aunts, didn't want to have anything to do with them. As we decided to go to the West, we had that choice. So we went on trains again, and we were transported to Belgium via Holland. And here I am, almost 15, and it was just wonderful to see these young ladies with long Dutch uniform, women's clothing, and the hats and the wooden shoes were rushing the train station. And they served us warm milk and some pastry. This was my first, most positive impression of the free world. From there we went to Belgium, from where we were planning to go to Israel. But the Britain forbade Jews, imagine, to immigrate to Israel. Anybody who dared was arrested, and you probably, if you haven't, it's interesting to watch. There is a wonderful movie, The Exodus. It tells all about it. So I came to Israel, I went to school for 2 years, and then I enrolled in the Israeli Air Force, where I served for 5 years as the rank I had was the highest rank of the sergeants, but here it's called a petty officer. But I liked the rank thing on my arm. I didn't want to be an officer. But I managed the office of the Chief of Supplies of the Air Force. So I knew all about airplanes and pilots, and during the war, my fiancé, who was a pilot, crashed in a test flight. And it was a very, very intense existence. When we came to Israel, we came through Yaffo because we were actually smuggled in. And we landed in Yaffo and we walked around and we saw all the Palestinians, all the Arabs, moving out with women, with children on their backs in the front, on donkeys, moving. And the minaret from the mosques were yelling, get out, and when you come back, in Arabic of course, get out, when you come back you'll have the Jews' houses and their wives and all the gold they have. And I just want to bring this up because there are a lot of false rumors. The Jews did not chase out the Arabs. They were chased out by their own priests. A few of them, I must say, were arrested or chased out, those who were rebellious and those who were fighting. But the majority of the people who are now in the camps, in the refugee camps, were people who were chased out by their own people. So, after I finished with the army, my husband, then husband, came here to study, and I did too. Before I retired, I was a teacher and a school psychologist in the Poughkeepsie schools. And I think that I have overcome my ignorance, my childhood ignorance, through the trips that I have made in my life. Thank you very much for listening.
unfortunately, due to time constraints, we can't have like a whole big question and answer session, but I think 3 questions we can do. So we have teachers with microphones in the aisles. When you raise your hand, a teacher will come to you and you may ask your question into the mic so everyone can hear. I see Mr. Harvey in the back right there, so please.
Well, I have a question. I'm very impressed by how successful you were. I don't know what how all 3 of you were very successful. Was that the case for the survivors to have so much success academically and professionally? Or was it just that you 3 happened to be?
So I believe the question is, were all the survivors as successful academically and like in the
And professionally.
And professionally as you were?
Some were, some were not. We were a cross-section of the population. Some are more successful than others. But from my point of view, most of the Holocaust survivors that I know that are at my age right now, they did okay for themselves.
I was at the meeting at Newport in the college. After my remark, one of the professors came up to me and she said, I am a professor here, I teach the Holocaust. And some of my best friends are survivors. She said, tell me one thing. How come, and she points at me, how come that all the survivors that I know do make something of themselves? I looked at her shocked. I don't know if some of you know the expression, some of my best friends are Jews. I said, education.
One more.
This is from Mr. Spitz. When you lived in the woods, how did you get your food?
When you lived in the woods, how did you get food?
Can you repeat it?
When you lived in the woods, how did you get
Yeah, we took with us some little bit of potatoes and flour, some grass started, fungus started growing on it. But it was winter most of the time, snow. I went, I couldn't leave footsteps behind me, which means that because somebody might have followed me and found us and killed us. That's why I had like a hockey branch, like a branch in the shape of a hockey stick, and I was putting snow back into my footsteps as I walked. Winters in that area, because it was very high in the mountains, came very quickly, which means that berries on bushes froze, as those berries and mushrooms froze, and everything froze suddenly because the winter came from one day to another one. First storm covered with snow, which means that grass, leaves, I knew which ones were poisonous. There were strawberries as big as about a quarter of an inch. Berries on bushes, I knew which ones were not poisonous. There were mushrooms growing on trees, on like rotten tree trunks and so on. Which means that this was a food and we ate snow and ice. We practically were all the time just few days from starving. I had tuberculosis after the war of malnutrition. My brother died 33 years old, my father never made it 60, and we survived. This was the toughest part, but it's a lot of food in the forest. which you walk over, which you walk through, and you don't recognize it, but we lived there for a long time, and knew what was edible and what it was tough. I can assure you, try to go for one night or one day or 3 days without food into a forest and try to survive, and you will see how, compare it to 200 days, 7 months we spent in that forest. And patrols were coming around trying to get us, and almost did. Once I was lined for execution, lined up with the all where I escaped. They didn't kill them. I came to bury them. They were alive, but all around without clothes, standing in snow. You cannot imagine in your wildest fantasies what it meant to be hunted like a wild animal, hiding from sight and still live on something you could find.
Thank you all for being so engaged during this extremely important event. I truly hope the incredible people seated to my right have allowed you to retain something personally meaningful from what you heard today. For the benefit of mankind, never forget the horrors of genocide. I will end the program by reading a short poem written by Ms. Falik's daughter titled The Legacy. I am a survivor. That's impossible, they say. You are too young. I am a survivor, because they are survivors. They fought for life, and I live. I am a survivor. When they struggled and starved, gave up or held on, they did it for me. I am a survivor, the child of survivors, of heroes. They gave me life, and I return the gift of eternal memory. I am a survivor, or so I will tell my children, and I will teach them. Never forget, because they too will be survivors. Thank you.